Shooter Breeze topic number one tonight says, are Palestinians African people? Based on the model proposed by Ali Mazrui, the Middle East is Northeast Africa. This makes Islam/Christianity and Judaism African. A Pan-Africanist ready to accept this. This came with, of course, with a link, but it actually came with several links. Let's see if we could grab these properly. So the first one takes us to Twitter. Is that right? The first one takes us to Twitter, but not that tweet. So it takes us to someone named Slank on Twitter, who says, quote, Madagascar is separated from the African continent by the 500-mile-wide Mozambique Channel. Greater Yemen is separated from Djibouti by only a stone throw. Yet Madagascar is politically part of Africa, while Greater Yemen is not. This is a quote from Ali Mazrui. Let me see if this is going to work. Well, okay. So this is an excerpt, I guess, from one of his writings. I guess the chapter is Black Continent, Red Sea, question mark. He says, a central thesis of ours in this part of the paper is that the Red Sea has no right to divide Africa from Arabia. Where then is Africa? What is Africa? How sensible are its boundaries? Islands can be very far from Africa and still be regarded part of Africa, provided they are not too near another major landmass. But a peninsula can be arbitrarily dis-Africanized. Madagascar is separated from the African continent by the 500-mile-wide Mozambique Channel. Greater Yemen, on the other hand, is separated from Djibouti by only a stone throw. Yet Madagascar is politically part of Africa, while Greater Yemen is not. Much of the post-colonial African scholarship addressed itself to the artificiality of the boundaries of contemporary African states, but little attention has been paid to the artificiality of the boundaries of the African continent itself. Why should North Africa end on the Red Sea when Eastern Africa does not end on the Mozambique Channel? Why should Tananarive be an African capital when Aden is not? There has been discussion in Africa as to whether the Sahara Desert is a chasm or link. Continental Pan-Africanism asserts that the Sahara is a sea of communication rather than a chasm of separation. Yet there are some who would argue that North Africa is not, quote unquote, really Africa. Why? Because it is more like Arabia, question mark. But in that case, why not push the boundary of North Africa further east to include Arabia? Why not refuse to recognize the Red Sea as a chasm, just as the Pan-Africanist has refused to concede such a role to the Sahara Desert? Why not assert that the African continent ends? All right, so this is another image, I guess a little trickier to read, but I'll try. Ends neither on the southern extremity of the Sahara nor on the western shore of the Red Sea. Should not Africa move northwards to the Mediterranean and northeastwards to the Persian Gulf? Alternatively, should this new concept be called Afrabia? The most redundant sea in African history may well be the Red Sea. This thin line of ocean has been deemed to be more relevant for defining where Africa ends than all the evidence of geology, geography, history, and culture. The northeastern boundary of Africa has been defined by a strip of water in the teeth of massive ecological and cultural evidence to the contrary. The problem goes back 3 to 5 million years ago when 3 cracks emerged on the east side of Africa. As Colin McEvedy puts it, one crack broke Arabia away, creating the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea, and reducing the area of contact between Africa and Asia to the Isthmus of Suez. Before the parting of the Red Sea, there was the parting of Africa to create the Red Sea as a divide. 3 cracks had occurred on the African crust, yet only the one which was resulted in a sea was permitted to, quote unquote, dis-Africanize what lay beyond the sea. The other 2 cracks resulted in, quote unquote, rift valleys, straight-sided trenches averaging 30 miles across. The eastern and western rifts left the African continent intact, but the emergence of a strip of water called the Red Sea has resulted in the geological secession of Arabia. But what a geological crack had once put asunder, the forces of geography, history, and culture have been trying to bind together again ever since. Who are the Amhara of Ethiopia, if not a people probably descended from South Arabians? What is Amharic but a Semitic language? What is a Semitic language if not a branch of the Afro-Asian family of languages? Was the Semitic parental language born in Africa, then crossed the Red Sea? Or was it from the Arabian Peninsula originally and then descended upon such people as the Amhara, Tigray, and Hausa in Africa? How much of a bridge between Arabia and Africa are the Somali? All these are lingo-cultural questions which raise the issue of whether the geological succession of Arabia 3 to 5 million years ago has been in the process of being neutralized by Afrabia, the intimate cultural integration between Arabia, the Horn, and the rest of Africa. In the linguistic field, it is certainly no longer easy to determine where African indigenous languages end and quote-unquote Semitic trends begin. There was a time when both Hamites and Semites were regarded as basically alien to Africa. In due course, Hamites were regarded as a fictitious category, and the people represented by the term, like the Tutsi, accepted as indisputably African. What about the Semites? They have undoubtedly existed in world history, but are they quote unquote Africans who crossed the Red Sea like Moses on the run from the Pharaoh? Or are the Semites originally quote unquote Arabians who penetrated Africa? These agonizing problems of identity would be partially solved overnight if the Arabian Peninsula was part and parcel of Africa, or if a new solidarity of Afrabia took root. Thanks to who posted this for making me have to do all that damn reading. But at the same time, this came with another link. So let me get right to it. This one takes us to Oyin. Is Oyin that Nigerian Bahamian sister? I can't remember her name. There's a Nigerian Bahamian sister who's a lawyer, apparently, who's always on Twitter antagonizing a group of black people. So Oyin tweets at Dr. Umar Johnson, "You know nothing and woefully ignorant. Palestinians are African. The history and geography of the Levant is closely tied to Africa. You cannot self-proclaim to be Pan-African if you're not inclusive of Palestinians. The African struggle includes Palestinians." And this was a retweet of Umar, I'm sure, ranting here. Let me play it, and then we'll look at the last link, and then we'll discuss it all.
I've been getting harassed by Palestinians all over my posts, all in my inbox. I want to say this to the Palestinians. I have no gripe with you. I have no issue with you. But it is very arrogant for you. I did not disrespect you or your people. I wished y'all well in your struggle against white supremacy. I wish the Palestinians well in this struggle against white supremacy, but I'm not taking attention off of the African struggle to pay attention to your struggle. Y'all sent me a meme, a little video of a Palestinian. He showed the picture of 3 paintings that was created by a few Palestinians during the Black Lives Matter era. And to those Palestinian young men and women who painted those murals on behalf of African people, if you were sincere in what you did, I thank you. But I gotta be very clear about something. You understand? You're not dealing with a fool. You're dealing with a very deep critical thinker. Just because you painted a mural doesn't mean you give a damn about black people. I can show you murals painted by white people. I can show you statues built by white people. I can show you buildings erected by white people. I can show you institutions created by white people who didn't give a damn about black people. So I want to make sure we understand this, my Palestinian family. Just because a couple of Palestinians painted a couple of murals does not mean the Palestinian people stands with black people. Palestine is a nation state with a government. Has the Palestinian government ever entered any argument on behalf of African people at the United Nations? I'm gonna ask the question again, because you showing me murals that was painted by the Palestinians 5-10 years ago. That does not mean you stand with us. Did the Palestinian government enter any formal argument on the floor of the United Nations on behalf of American Africans? That's the question I'm asking. Did the Palestinian state put forth a resolution that the Arab states who participated in the enslavement of African people need to pay restitution and reparations? Did the Palestinian government put forth a resolution to stop the trafficking of Africans right now into slavery in East Africa? Don't show me no damn paintings. Don't show me no damn paintings. Show me some paintings. I could go paint right now a mural for Palestine. Does that mean I care about Palestine because I threw up a mural? That's not no true liberation solidarity. What are you doing politically for us? What has the government of Palestine ever done politically to benefit American Africans or politically to benefit continental Africans? Huh? Can you point to something political? Don't show me no damn artwork. Don't show me no damn artwork. And because you got 3 old murals that was painted by a handful of Palestinians, that means the Palestinian people stand with Black America. That's a damn lie. Don't be hypocritical. Don't be hypocritical. You have Palestinian Africans catching hell in your country. You have Palestinian Africans catching hell in your country.
Absolutely. So there's one more link to this that takes us to the Discord, actually. On the Discord, there was this image posted along with this prompt from Cam Giverse. Shout out to Cam Giverse, who was with us last week, actually. He says, the promoters of Afro-Asiatic are creating a pathway that allows Black Christians and Muslims to claim that the Abrahamic tradition is African. Now, on this panel, we've talked about this before. We've heard it a bunch, that Christianity is African and blah, blah, blah. But I think this prompt actually opens up another question too, because, and shout out to Azuli, who's out there in the chat. He said something in one of his messages that's important to me. He says, the land is African, but not y'all. Like, when you look at where Israel and all this shit is, I mean, clearly, that's a part of the African continent. But these people aren't. We have the North Africans, the Amazigh, I think that's how you pronounce their designation, who are Arabs. But what we shouldn't forget is that we do have Africans in those regions, and so we have to be mindful, I guess, of the Africans in that area. I guess I skipped a lot of messages in the chat, so I'll double back to them in a second. But this is Shoot the Breeze topic number 1 tonight. Palestinians, African people, based on the model proposed by Ali Mazrui. The Middle East is Northeast Africa. This makes Islam, Christianity, and Judaism African. Pan-Africanists ready to accept this. So let me start with Black Steel tonight. Black Steel, what say you to this prompt, or what we just read through a few minutes ago?
So here's, excuse me, here's my thoughts on this. First of all, the boundaries between continents have always really been mostly lines on a map, mostly, cultural, not just geographic, but also there's cultural and political differences as well. So if you look at a map, North America and South America are connected, but yet for political reasons, for other reasons, they decided that South America begins at Isthmus of Panama. And there was a point in history where Panama was actually a part of Colombia. But because the United States wanted to build a canal in Panama, they took that land so that way they could build a canal on that land. So a country was created, a boundary was created to justify political ends. Who's to say that South America doesn't begin at the southern border of Mexico or Guatemala? Who geographically, the islands of the Caribbean are considered to be a part of North America because they're close to North America. But yet, for some reason, Trinidad and Tobago are a part of South America because they're closer. These different boundaries between the continents and the islands have always been jumbled. So for even the continent of Europe and Asia are connected. So, we talk about how even in school we teach the kids about Europe and Asia. But when I was growing up, it was just one continent, Eurasia. Who decided that Europe ended where the Ural Mountains began and that's where Asia ends? So from a political standpoint, Africa has always ended at the Sinai Peninsula or the Red Sea. I certainly understand the geographic and how it works as far as considering to be a part of the African continent, but I don't feel, at least as far as my understanding, the Palestinians are African people. They are Arab people. They've always identified with Arab people. And in fact, I would go back even further. I would say the Palestinians are the direct descendants of the original inhabitants of the of Canaan, of Palestine. They were the original Canaanites. So these are people who were present in the land when the Romans took over, when the Assyrians and the Babylonians were all in this land. They converted to Islam, they converted to Christianity, some of them, and they've been there. So we understand when the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD, they took the people from out of Jerusalem. They didn't take everybody. There was a good amount of people who were still there in the land. So I don't feel that these people are African people. I don't necessarily agree with this model proposed by Ali Marouzi. Not to say he's wrong, but I think there's a lot of history that shows that these people, not only are they not African, but many of them are hostile towards African people. Many of these Arabs that came into North Africa, they did everything possible to eradicate and subjugate the people who were already living there. So we see even there were already people who were living in this area. They were already black people, dark-skinned Africans, not these Arabs. So when I look at this situation like this, I don't really think idea that these people are African. And this desire to claim the Abrahamic religions as African, it's a weird thing to me. Why do you want to claim these religions that hate you so badly? Christianity has done so much harm towards African people. Islam has done so much harm. Why do you want to claim these religions just because they happen to be in a geographical area close to what you believe in? So even Judaism itself, Judaism doesn't come about in history until after the fall of Jerusalem to King Nebuchadnezzar. Even before that, the ancient Hebrews worshiped multiple gods. They believed in more than one God. We don't really get Judaism until we see the so-called Jews return back from the Babylonian captivity. But I'm sorry, I'm getting on a tangent here. I just don't understand this need to claim these religions as our own when these religions have been so detrimental to us, even if they originated on a landmass that could be considered Africa at some point in history, even though it wasn't populated by Africans. That's a weird reach to me. Like, why is it you want to claim these so badly when these religions have made you, has dehumanized you and provided justification for your enslavement? So I've spoke long enough. I'll let some of the other brothers speak, but thank you for Koku.
Now, thanks for that, Black Seal. In the chat, let me shout out Afro Native World, KW Don 7, and Azuli. I think I shouted him out earlier, and Del J. Let me shout you guys out first. In the chat, Del J said that John Henrik Clarke says no such thing as the Middle East. It's Western Asia. Earlier, Afro Native World said Ethiopia and the Origin of Civilization, Part 1 by John G. Jackson, 1939, spoke of Ethiopians inhabiting all those lands in the ancient days, India, Arabia, including Palestine. In the chat, Oni, from the pro-Black perspective, he said such a crazy premise, if I remember correctly, to this prompt. With that said, let me ask Oni. Oni, what say you to all of it?
Yeah, this is why don't nobody take a lot of Black folks seriously. You know, I mean, I don't even know if this is a Black person, but this is why a lot of people don't take Black people seriously. Here's the problem, right? I mean, here's the problem. He says, why don't we call this place Africa? Call it Africa. You know, just call it. Just go call it Africa. Now what? That doesn't change that the people there are clearly not Africans. And I mean, and I think Arzuli, I'm surprised I'm agreeing with Arzuli and Black Steel today. You know, something wrong. Something wrong. But Arzuli was like, hey, you know, the land is African, but the people aren't. And that's the thing that we got to realize. It's like the Afrikaners. You know, the Afrikaners are Afrikaners African people? No. Are they in Africa? Absolutely. You know, and I'm not even saying that Palestine is Africa, but you know, as Afro Native World pointed out, once upon a time, Africa, as we know it, was called Western Ethiopia, and India and them were called Eastern Ethiopia. You know, and a lot of the world was you know, African of descent, African descent. Even to the point where, you know, you have this whole place called the Melanesian Islands, which nobody really talks about, but they're all just heavily melanated people. Some people believe in descended from ancient Africans. You know, at one point, Africans were a more global people, but there was that pushback. And that pushback, I'm not going to say that the Palestinians are the indigenous people, because how are they going to be indigenous people if it was all once African, right? But the pushback came from the Eurasian people, the Aryan invaders, the quote unquote Semites. And that's the thing that I don't even understand what this guy is, what this quote unquote scholar is doing. Anybody could tell you who the Hamites are, because it's said in the few books that refer to the Hamites tell you who the Hamites are. They say they're the Ethiopians, the Egyptians, and the Phoenicians. No. I think I said the Canaanites actually, but the point being, in fact, and the thing is that the Canaanites are only added there in that description. This is from the Torah, if you will. The Canaanites are probably only added there because the reason why essentially the Canaanites get cursed in the story of Noah, they get cursed to serve the Israelites, you know. And so, who knows if they were even Hamites, or if the story was fictionalized just to justify the subjugation of the Canaanites. You understand? In this story of the Israelites put out as they had learned it, but the Hamites, you know, clearly the Egyptians and the Ethiopians, and we all know those are African people. But yeah, the point being that, one, you can't call somebody African just because they're in Africa, and two, you could always, if you want to, you can call Europe Africa. You know, Europe Europe and Africa are only separated by 8.1 miles, 13 kilometers, the Strait of Gibraltar. You can say, hey, you know what? Europe is closer than Madagascar, therefore Europe is Africa. You can say something stupid like that. Nobody's stopping you. But you have to come to terms with the reason why people will call one place Africa and one place Europe and one place Asia is because one place has Africans, one place has Europeans, and one place has Asians. And the reality is this: the Palestinians are not African people, so we say, you know what? It's not Africa. And if the day comes when African people take over, freaking like for instance, when they took over Southern Europe and when they took over, you could call it whatever it is you want to, right? Just like how these white people, they call South Africa Europe or some shit, or whatever they call South Africa, right? Or just like these Arabs call North Africa, whatever they want to call it, right? Where you have the authority and the ability and the power and the influence, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But at this point in time, you then looking at the map and saying, well, you know what? It's connected, so therefore, shut the fuck up. You know what I'm saying? Just shut the fuck up. That's all I'm gonna say.
Only before you go, is North Africa lost to African people?
There's no place is lost. Like no place is lost for all eternity. But like at this point in time, the trouble with us, and I see this, I say us, just generally, right? The problem with us is that we looking at the like you have to you gotta focus where you can focus. You gotta get in where you can fit in, right? And the trouble is that it's like I think it's a Brother Harsh Reality podcast who tell us a lot of brothers are playing Risk when it comes to African history. They're saying, if we just do this, we do that, we can take this, we can. You can't do that shit. When I went to like you asked me how many battle stations did I take over, or how many military bases did I take over, or how much power did I disrupt while I was in Africa? Not a damn thing. You know what I'm saying? Like in order to take over North Africa, you're going to need a really you're not only going to need a powerful military, right? But you're going to need to be influencing this powerful military. If we don't have any, this powerful military has to be an aggressor on North Africa in this wide political context. You know what I'm saying? Even Israel, with all its power, is taking over the land of Palestine very, very slowly. But it's taking it over, sure, but it's taking it over very, very slowly. And you don't have an iota of power compared to Israel at this point in time. Not, and I say you generally, and to say that maybe there are some African nations that have comparable power. And some people say no, some people say yes. But as far as like the Pan-African movement, what is their power when it comes to that military presence on the continent, on top of that military presence that will be aggressive against a North African neighbor that's not even attacking them at this point in time? It's not realistic. Now, if you get on the continent and you get a good, powerful military presence, you could do the same as Israel could do. Just like nobody, because at one point somebody was saying, the Zionists were getting together and they were saying, is Palestine a lost cause? Some people were saying that, and now they don't say that. Or 2 months ago they didn't say that, right? But my point is that there's no such thing as a lost cause if you have the will and ambition to do it. But the Pan-Africanists at this point in time don't have the will and ambition to do it. And they're not, and we're not, collectively focusing even on our own countries where we could be building at least a respectable power base for the majority of us. Like what are we going to North Africa at this point in time for when we have so much infrastructural development to be had in regular, in what we call Black Africa? We have so much to be done. Why don't we just focus on that first? That's what I would say.
Appreciate that, Oni. Welcome back, by the way. Last but not least, let's go to Buana. Buana, what say you?
1 2 1 2. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great, 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 awesome. I want to answer your question. When the question when you ask, um, is North eh, is North Africa a lost cause to the sub-Saharan Africans? It's just as a lost cause as California is to the whites who currently occupy that territory, or Arizona is. Slowly and surely, you are seeing the Mexicans, the Spanish reclaim their territory through immigration, illegal or legal. They coming back for the land which was what was originally theirs. It'll only take time. Give it about 50 years. And plus, they have more children than the settlers, the colonial settlers. So we'll see how that goes. So goes California and Arizona and all them Texas and all them other southern states that that borders Mexico. Mexico will eventually reclaim their territories as the Africans, the original inhabitants, will reclaim their territories. It may take 100 years, it may take 200 years, but they'll eventually reclaim their territory, I believe. But let me first start in trying to answer the question in terms of whether the Palestinian Africans, whether the Palestinians are African people. It depends on who you ask first, and it depends on when you want to start the time, when you want to start the clock. Because if the Africans, the black Africans who came out of continental Africa and went into all the other territories of the world, are the original human beings of this planet, they would have went to Palestine. They would have created situations in Palestine. They would have been the original inhabitants of that territory. And they would have their children and children and children and things of that nature. So would they be considered African? Well, those people who were original or native to Palestine would have mixed and mingled with the so-called Asiatics. And then voila, you have the Arabs. Oh, people call it the Palestinians. I don't know how that works. But I'm thinking that these people were the original inhabitants. So the first question I would ask is, what do the Palestinians consider themselves to be? You have to ask them first before we ask or get into any intellectualisms or academic ideas, theoretical ideas. Ask the Palestinians, what do they think about themselves? Most of them, I'm assuming, would say, first, I'm Muslim. Next, they would say that they are Arabs. But you have a portion of people who exist in that society say, well, we were here first. Our family came here thousands of years ago. We are original inhabitants of this area, and we are African people. Only mentioned Melanesia on the other side of the world. When you speak to these people, these native peoples, they say they came from Africa. They don't disassociate themselves from Africa. So this is the reason why I say it depends on who you ask. It depends on who you ask in Palestine. Because even the black Palestinians would say first they're gonna tie themselves to their religion because they colonize people, and then they can say, well, we are African people. So I say it depends on who. And then you have Arabs who would have mixed with African people. What do they say about themselves? Do they say they half breeds? I don't know. So my first inclination would be to ask the people of that area, what do they determine themselves as? What do they define themselves as? Ali Mazrui is a dangerous character. And people you would say, don't play the man, play the idea. But Ali Mazrui is a man who is he calls himself a Pan-African, but really and truly he is a black Arabist. He's a black Arabist. And him and John Henry Clark had issues. John Henry Clark, when he was alive, will tell you that Ali Mazrui likes to put a Muslim or Arabic spin in terms of African civilizations. And he likes to put the Arabia and the Muslims front and center in terms of Africa becoming a civilized nation. They had big issues with one another. And you have to be careful with the authors of these kinds of writings. In this particular instance, I like to play the idea. I like to play what people actually believe. But in this instance, I have to take a look at the author himself, because he has interests in espousing the ideas he espouses. He has interests, his own particular interests and biases in the reasons why he would say a particular thing. But for me personally, I would ask the Palestinians, what do they think about themselves? And by and large, you're gonna hear them say that they are Muslims and they are Arabs, but there will be a large grouping of people who can claim the land of Palestine as their own, and they have a right to do so because their families have been there probably longer than the Arabs, and also they're gonna say that they are African people. So that's something that we have to contend with. But I'll stop there.
I appreciate that. One, I have a question for all of you at the end, but let's welcome in the meantime, let's welcome in our boy, Real Black Gentleman, RBG. How are you this week?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
All right. RBG, you heard everything everyone had to say. What say you?
Well, I mean, I guess, do I have an echo? Okay, I'm good. When we say that we're African, now black people, you know what I'm saying, who we're running under the assumption, have a synonymousness with Africa and African people. You know what I'm saying? We say that. Now, we can argue about the name, and was there a relatively indigenous name about black folks on the continent? You know what I'm saying? You might say Bantu, or there's all kinds of, you know what I'm saying. But I don't think it's really a hard thing for me. It's like I get it that black folks, you know what I'm saying, with naps. Again, the way that the people look. We don't say nappy hair enough. You know what I'm saying? Black people with nappy hair was ran up and down from Algeria to, you know what I'm saying, the Cape and all across. So we know that. And then there's people like that who were outside of it, but predominantly black folks was in. I mean, let's just say we know that until basically, you know what I'm saying, for all of basically extended history minus, you know what I'm saying, a couple, several thousand years, you know what I'm saying, the whole continent, you know what I'm saying, Hannibal was, you know what I'm saying, it was a brother, you know what I'm saying. And I've heard ideas that a lot of the people who were up in North Africa descended, like a lot of those people, who fled, North Africa, wound up down in West, from the northern regions, the Carthage area, you know what I'm saying, that heritage and Carthage, you know what I'm saying, came down and had to meander down south back when, you know what I'm saying, the desert. It's like, when we say the desert is the desert, it wasn't like back in the time of like Kemen and shit, it wasn't that bad. It was still rough, and it was on its way to being now, but there was a bit more tending to things. If you grow, agriculture, you can do a little bit of the fraying against, the desert. You can influence the climate, in a micro kind of sense, in a localized area. But as long as, you know what I'm saying, you're not being aggressive with that, things fall apart, whole, like, fields fall apart. That just, I'm talking about extended time frame. So like, yeah, all of the landmass is ours. You know what I'm saying? The whole idea of like what we think of like probably Arabs, hard Arabs, you know what I'm saying? Like, that is only relatively recent. So it shouldn't be a stretch to say that those people aren't Africans. Those people, we know where those people came from. Like, we know those people weren't there. They know that those people don't come there. I mean, if you have to look at it through multiple filters and lenses. You know what I'm saying? You have to swap them out, you know what I'm saying, with some dexterity about it. You know what I'm saying? Yes, it's the religion of Islam isn't indigenous to Africa. We know that, but neither are some of the peoples. But although some of the peoples came in, some of the peoples mingled in, you know what I'm saying? Women get snatched up and babies is born and they become half and halfish, you know what I'm saying? Then they become more of like the father, more like, you know what I'm saying, the other than they do of like, you know what I'm saying, their original. It's something that is not an instantaneous thing. So, I mean, people in Tunisia, they can be sitting here and born, you know what I'm saying, over 50 generations literally in Africa. But I mean, one of these things is not like the other. It's just, it is what it is. I mean, as far as like, the whole idea of ever having the whole continent back, I mean, that goes back to the whole idea if we ever had it in the first place, which is ostensible because it's like, well, from a perspective of not really active being contended from, yeah, but like now that, you know what I'm saying, the top third of Africa is basically out of African, people that who have nappy hair, and you know what I'm saying, who have characteristics of the people who kind of been there longer than these other peoples. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a minute. Cause the whole idea of having everyone join in with African causes, like is Palestinian Africa. I mean, hell, is Saudi Arabia Africa? You know what I'm saying? At this point, the shit gets mundane, yo. I mean, like, well, it's right there across the ocean. I mean, peoples have their claim and they assertiveness about what it is. I mean, it is. If I left the house, if I move out of a house, I can't go back and say, well, that was my house. I done left all effect out of it. For whatever reason, I absconded it. You know what I'm saying? For whatever reason, I can't go back to the house I grew up in as a child and say, well, that's my house. And then walk up in the house, like, and go on sleeping in the bed and just like, well, whatever, it don't matter, just my house. I'm saying, like, in order to do that, you know what I'm saying, it would take a true landmass from the geography that we is to do all those things. It won't happen overnight. I mean, I think it's kind of foolish to even try to make the arguments about it. I mean, they're not going to do anything about it. I mean, I don't think it's a big. We know what. I mean, are we like second guessing what African is? Like, I'm an African. Like, yo, like people. What I'm saying. Whether they say it in English or French or in Spanish, you know what I'm saying, Africa, or, you know what I'm saying, well, it is what it is. You know what we are when we say it. It's approximate enough when we say it. I mean, so we know what we is. So why are we getting caught up in the tautology? You know what I'm saying? Like, we can't get caught up in the tautology of all of this. Like, we can't be like, philosophical about this. It's like, we know who we are, like, and we know that they aren't who we are. So like, why is this even a big deal?
Yeah, so I want to answer that. I want to answer that very same thing. Coco, could you go back to Oni's statement just now in terms of he doesn't think we are confused about whether a person is African or not? I want to address that for a minute, because there is grand confusion, and I can explain it why. Because you have this into for you specifically, RBG. This is really for that statement. You have people like Elon Musk who's going around claiming, I think he's claiming he's African American. He's claiming he is African American. Then you have some Sudanese brothers who they say that they're African, they really Arabs. And some of them really legitimately are. Some of them legitimately are. They are mixed between Arabs and African, but they are so Arabized that they have now taken out the African perspective of themselves. Also, in this 21st century, you have black people who look like they from the deepest part of Congo, calling themselves Indian, calling themselves Hebrews, calling themselves all manner of things outside of being so-called sub-Saharan African, even though the DNA speaks to something completely different. So there's grand confusion over that specific term, because as you mentioned today, RBG, you said you mentioned the term nappy head.
Yeah,
that goes back to the idea that many people only believe that you are African if you are sub-Saharan African, because you have people in Ethiopia who don't have nappy hair, brother. You have people in Sudan who don't have nappy hair; they as black and blue. You have people in Nubia who have blacker than the blackest night, but they don't necessarily have nappy hair. So I'm saying that there's grand confusion over the term African. Don't believe that it isn't, brother. Because you may have some clarity, but many people are very confused.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead, brother. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I guess it's like, it's like, I don't want to speak too long, because I mean, all of this is protracted. All of this is extremely protracted and in slow motion. So like, you know what I'm saying? We know that there's generations upon generations, and even I can kind of break it down to a more recent sense, because I mean, the natural communications, mass media communications allow people to be projected and be you'll see imagery and you'll be that points to something in your environment that will describe you as something, and without you being critical. I mean, if I can be a Tunisian and they'll talk Africa, you know what I'm saying, like and it's like you'll sit back and say it's like and you'll unconscious because the continent is identified as African for through what I'm saying. It's complex. I know that as far as like people who are born, let's say these Chinese babies that come in, these Blasians that some people call them in. I mean, look, to me, I always recognize like gradations. And like, there's like what's really good, a couple shades off of, you know what I'm saying? And like, it's just degrees of like offness. You know what I'm saying? I get it's like the clearly if I have to say it, I'm just gonna say it, but Lord knows, don't just bite at me out of context. Like, hell, the Arabs are more African than the Boers, but Lord knows I understand that it's like I said, 50 generations of Arabs versus like 20 of the Boers. You see what I'm getting at? It's like, I get it, even though there's 100,000 generations, you know what I'm saying? Don't snap on the context, you know what I'm saying? I get it. And I know that for anyone who would do that, uses it through another lens. They don't they'll try to say that it's, I don't know. Continent is only and someone actually said this. I'm gonna leave on this. Continent is a really funny, like container. It's nice when you visibly look at the globe, which is something that unless you're because again, people didn't draw out the shape of the world by looking over it in space. They were flattened out on the ground and made extrapolations based off of longitude and latitude relative to their estimations of how spherical the world was, type shit. So they were constantly drawing these maps in 1905, 1925, not knowing that once they looked up in space, it was pretty damn accurate to their guesses. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I get that, like containing the world when you look at it physically on a map. Yeah, but look, I mean, naturally, like Oni said, you can't look at it like that, like Risk. I mean, we know who we are. I mean, all we got to do is when they use the mass media, just ignore it. Just like say your piece, drop it, and they go and contest, and you just let them fade out. I'm gonna drop the mic.
Appreciate that, RBG. I asked this question in the chat. I got 2 responses. I'll read those in a second. But when I asked the panelists, some of you touched on it already. Those of you who haven't, the floor is yours. But what is an African to you? We should probably ask this question like once a month or something like that, right? But what is an African to you? Anyone can step forward and answer.
I'll go since nobody wants to go. For me, African relates to psychology. It relates to culture. It relates to the fact that I believe that I'm an original, and everything coming after me is a copy of it. It relates to the fact that I am the father, I am the beginner, the author. It relates to Homo sapien sapien, the thinking human being. I am the first. I am the first. This is what I relate my Africanity to. I relate my Africanness to the fact that I have a responsibility to the planet that I exist on, to fight the people who would seek to destroy it, because the land was given to me. All of it. not just the continent of Africa, but all of it, because I was here first. So culture, psychology, all of these things, by design. I am here. I am the originator. I am the omega. I'm the beginning and the end. So I align my Africanity and the idea of that to that concept and that idea. And I have weird children around here doing a bunch of madness, but it's for me. It's a responsibility for me, people like myself, people with my hue, to set things in order. Because as the originator of this planet, the author of this planet, the author of civilization, we have to get things in order. We are tasked with that responsibility. You know, as the oldest people here on the planet, is in our genes and DNA. You know, people talk about the fittest of the fittest and all these kinds of ideas and things like that. Well, I survived millennia, you know, through the plains of Africa, through the so-called transatlantic experience in the Western Hemisphere, and I'll be here continuously, you know, for millions and millions of years. When uh, there will be my little sons who are recreated, they would have been gone from the planet. I'll still exist here on this plane. I'm naturally here. I'm naturally here. You know, I don't when the sun shines on me every night, every day, when the sun shines on me, I get power and energized, but I don't get cancer. You know what I mean? I don't get cancer. My melanin is almost like a chlorophyll. You know, the environment that I exist in doesn't hurt me because I am natural to it, as opposed to any other groupings of people. So this is what the responsibility that I'm tasked with here on this planet. The gods of the universe, the gods of this earth, this natural earth. So that's what I attach my Africanity to. Maybe that's far-fetched, but that's what I believe when I say that and use that principle and idea. But I'll stop there.
Appreciate that, Buana. The brother who was trying to get on just now, try again. I didn't see you at first. Try again. I'll bring you up on the panel. Does anyone else want to answer the question?
All right, yeah. So I could jump in.
Go ahead,
So I wrote inside of my book of Power. I have a glossary. If I'm not gonna read the whole thing. It's actually only 2 paragraphs, but I'm not gonna read the whole thing. But basically, I said it's the original race on Ta. You know, Ta is Earth, right? We founded the greatest civilizations on Ta and have a unique way, our way. You know, if you guys know about 2000 Seasons, that's where our way comes from, right? He says our earliest incantation was the Twa. Although since Controverse is here, you can probably correct me. But for 200,000 years, we were unrivaled. And I said that we won a race war against Neanderthals. So what the African is that pure-blooded, as our spoken word artist, Buana just said, pure-blooded human. You know, original human. The original person, the original phenotype. And again, like I said, the phenotype might have changed from, some people speculate that the Twa or the some people say the Grito or what have you are what the original humans might have looked like. I don't know. But what I'm saying is that we as African people, that's who we are. You know, other people are very likely either mixed with Neanderthals or Denisovans. Just a different species altogether. But we are the pure original Homo sapien on this planet, Homo sapien sapien, if you will. And that's where the big distinction comes from. And I don't think anybody. And as far as the debate on, well, who's Neanderthal? I mean, who's African versus who's not African, and so on and so forth. We have to come to terms with that. There's a difference between ethnicity, nationality, and race. And so when I'm talking about African, I'm talking about race. But of course, if you're saying by nationality, for instance, like for instance, my nationality would be American. You know what I mean? My race, obviously African, and if you were to say my ethnicity, you might even say Jamaican. You understand? So that's where that all comes in. That's all I'm gonna say. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Before I bring in the new panelists, does anyone else want to answer that question that Buana and Oni tackled? All right. Before I bring in the new panelists, let me just go back to the question I asked. So in the chat, when I asked the question, Trigger Happy said, an African to me equals black. That's what I always say too. Camden says it like that too. Black equals African. He says an African has similar worldview, similar linguistic origins, and very similar spiritual or culture. I think the Happy River Valley and that continuum, in my opinion, answers this. Afro-Native World answered the question as well. He said, to me, African equals black in the diaspora and continent. big no to continentalism. Haiti or Haiti is more African than Morocco, which Trigger Happy 262 Plus agreed. Shout out to Anthony McPhail. He says the original concept of Pan-African, meaning all people of African descent, i.e. black people, has been co-opted by the concept of continentalism. So shout out to Anthony. You're welcome to join the panel anytime you want. The link is pinned to the top of the chat. Let's welcome in the brother Camjiverse this week. 2 weeks in a row. Camjiverse, how are you this week?
It was good. It's good to see the post that I know sparked a lot of debate. But if you could refresh me, like how far have we gotten so far, like with respect to the post that I made in the conversation?
That's a good one. The conversation has covered several things. I'll put up the original prompt so you'll get an idea what it was we were actually discussing.
Yeah.
We've covered a few different things. In the meantime, you could tell us what are your thoughts on what an African actually is.
I think the African, I would say that a black person is an African, but at the same time, like I do have a post that I'm getting ready to share, a live premiere, and it like basically goes over what Cheikh Diop meant when he used neg to classify the ancient Egyptian population. And for those who are familiar with African-centered linguistics, Egyptian neg was like the original title, formulated by Theophile Benga in an extension of what Cheikh Anta Diop classified as Paleo-African or Paleo-African. And blackness in that context, in the Ethiopian context, represents the full phenotypic diversity of the African continent. So it wouldn't necessarily be like a bifurcation between North African and so-called Sub-Saharan African, right? Because even if we go into what it means to be North African, like the 23rd parallel, which is, the extent of the Tropic of Cancer, actually sits in southern Egypt and Nubia. And that's technically North Africa, but that would also be tropical Africa. So you could find some nuance even among the Berber or the Amaziga population in the Siwa area of Egypt. You find Berbers who are, genetically more so related to inner African, West and Central African populations than they are to Northern African populations. So like the concept of black in continentalism can go a lot of ways, because if we were to take it in the Martin Delaneyite or a Delanian context, blackness would be continentalism, because the idea for black empowerment, for Pan-African nationalism, would be to subsume the entire continent. And that's also a Garveyite perspective. So I'm not necessarily one who would leave a state or two to foreigners, Eurasians, Amu, but also at the same time, like if we're about like what we say we are about, then not only should we take the entire continent, but we should even extend, our realm of influence to the diaspora. So like I guess I wouldn't necessarily fit in either or category, but like the nuance and the context would basically make me discern, which one that I would go with.
So the original prompt was about Palestinians being African people based on what this model proposed by Ali Mazrui, right? That the Middle East is just Northeast Africa. How would you deal with these designations of what is Africa versus what is an African? You touched on what an African is, but let's talk about what is Africa from what isn't Africa. What say you?
Well, I mean, I always go back to linguistics, in my anthropological analysis, because it's the strongest field of anthropology when it's done correctly, methodologically, genetics being the weakest field. But based upon the prompt that you see there, if you were to use Afroasiatic, which is like the mainstream Greenbergian category, based upon mass comparison or multilateral analysis, those people, Palestinians and various Hebrews, would be African in the sense that they are Afroasiatic speakers, or in the sense that their language originates on the African continent, using that Greenbergian model which he built off of Friedrich Müller, who formulated Hamitic-Semitic, which eventually became Afro-Asiatic from the Göttingen school. So that'd be the mainstream linguistic context. But African-centered scholars, they actually don't see a genetic relationship, meaning diachronic or historical in linguistics, between the so-called ancient Egyptian language and the Semitic language. The different features, on the morphological or the word structure or the phonological level, which is the word sound, they don't necessarily match between Coptic and any of the Semitic languages, and they would be borrowed in the sense that you may have loan words here and there, but they don't necessarily come from the same root. So if I were to use an Obangan or Ethiopian analysis, they would not be African. They would be, Amu and Eurasian primarily. With respect to certain, minority levels of admixture or of interaction between Africans and Palestinians, some of them may have Black ancestry. But if I were to use an African-centered approach, I would have to consider them within the zone of confluence, separate from the African continent.
I have a
that.
I have a question. I have a question. Two questions really, for Cam Verse, because he just made two definitions, made two statements that I feel is very important, not necessarily to gloss over. He said that in the field of what he was talking about, I can't remember exactly what it is. He said that genealogy is the weakest and linguistics is the strongest. I want him to go further into that, explaining that, expand on that a little bit more. And I also would, I try to take over the show. I also would like him to give us his thoughts on Ali Mazrui and why. Well, give us his thoughts on Ali Mazrui. Those two things that I'd really want him to answer if he could.
Ali Mazuri, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. He gave some good scholarship. He was certainly, like, he had a polemic in the defense of Islam, and he saw himself as a African Muslim, and I do believe that he represented himself as a member of the Arab world or as a part of the Afrasian world. And I think that he comes from a tradition that we speak about in terms of those who are the advocates of an Afro-Asiatic relationship or an Afro-Asiatic union. It's a classic case of that type of scholarship. So, to a certain degree, there may be certain things that he may be useful for, especially when it comes to the identification of, like, say, the Natufians, who would be seen as the predecessors of the population that developed agriculture in the Levant, first of all, right? In that sense, in terms of affirming like Black Athena type of consciousness, where you can say that within the zone of confluence of Western Asia, that the Greeks pulled from to build their civilization, there were certain African people in that environment. Now, with that said, when you're dealing with genetics, to answer your other questions, genetics is highly speculative. There's sampling bias in genetics. The sampling bias is against African populations, and it's in favor of Eurasian, particularly European populations. There's classification bias in that the majority of the genetic markers are classified as European, even though the majority of the genetic diversity is African. There's methodological problems with principal component analysis, which is basically a methodology used by geneticists to simplify complicated data sets and allow, a facilitated explanation behind the different commonalities interregionally of different populations. And there's room for error. There's a big margin of error when you're using those types of eigenvectors and eigenvalues in the matrix mathematics of principal component analysis. And because genetics basically pulls from linguistic research, even though the majority of the linguistic research that it pulls from isn't necessarily scientific, it's based upon, a problem called mass comparison or multilateral comparative analysis that more so can conduct a survey of related languages using a methodology called glottochronology and lexicostatistics. Lexicostatistics basically takes lexical items or vocabulary between different languages and takes a percentage of similarity between those languages, then uses an equation in glottochronology to trace back the point of divergence in time. So most of the time when you're looking at Mondoid populations, Bontoid populations, so-called Cushitic populations, and they give you a point of coalescence, typically that's done using lexicostatistics and glottochronology. The problem with that is the fact that the rate of sound change isn't constant. And there's a variety of different factors socioculturally, environmentally, that could lead people to change sounds or to adopt, vocabulary from neighboring groups. So when you're using that methodology, which is standard in mass comparison and linguistics, it's not the most accurate way to get a genetic relationship between speakers of different languages. So that's a problem in linguistics. And because most of these categories in Bantu, Afroasiatic, Negro Congo or Niger Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Khoisan are built using mass comparison and Greenberg's multilateral comparative analysis. And then genetics pulls from these faulty categories to try to make inferences based upon their different admixture models, right? It's not accurate. It's speculating based upon something that's not defined. When somebody comes to me and says, oh, this is evidence of Bantus diverging, Proto-Bantus diverging from the Iranian culture, 20,000 years ago, I always ask, how can a proto area of diffusion that has never been proven to be valid be defined historically? It's not possible. So, that's a problem with inaccurate linguistics. But when you have affirmative, accurate historical comparative analysis within linguistics, also called a diachronic analysis, where you're basically, finding these recurrent non-accidental sound correspondences on the phonological and morphological level between the vocabulary of the different languages, then you have an accurate blueprint to build upon cultural anthropology to find those themes and then apply that to the material record, which would be archaeology, right? When you do it the right way, you got to get the linguistic questions right first before you can move forward in the other areas.
Thank you for that, Canjiver. So you have to go through linguistics first, and that's the point of entry. Thank you.
Yes.
Can I
No problem.
I want to speak about this because like I'm hearing what you're saying, that linguistics has what you're basically saying is you're trying to use this idea of trying to find a common, but what I'm saying with linguistics is that I just said in the chat, it's like, if you don't really know what people were saying, how do you even make the inferences was trying to say when a language started or anything like that? I mean, I think that linguistics is only it can only be used in a contemporary sense without like hard evidence of what words were and even understanding what they meant. When I heard you say that genetics it doesn't work because of the sample size, well, I think that that's just that.
That's not what I said actually, but continue.
Oh, okay. Please tell me what you said because I just want to make sure I'm hearing it right because like
so there's.
Because you said that genetics is weak because of the bias of sample size, right?
That's one of many biases.
Yeah, but I mean, and there's also because it's like genealogy doesn't work. I mean, I'll say genetics doesn't really work without genealogy, just like linguistics doesn't work without a hard, historical sense of words like an etymology. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think that. I think that if you even in the set, I'm trying to say that both you still need peripheral sciences or disciplines to go along even with each of those. You can't just use genetics or linguistics by themselves because you do need, because they're both like contemporary type things. They don't work in deep past. You know what I'm saying? Linguistics, people change up their slang all the time. So it's like, unless you could actually put it to, and you know what I'm saying? Like the idea that, the Africans didn't have, Africans had all kinds of written forms of, or at least textual, whether or not be, cloth or, what I'm saying? I've heard insipidity was a form of writing in one area at one point in time. There's things where I do think that linguistics, we just don't have. And even you can. Hell, Europe doesn't even write like that. But it's really hard to know what black people were really saying 500 years ago. Because to the best of my knowledge, there's very, very, very few kind of like text to that described what was going on at that time. What I'm saying is that I don't want to discount genetics because with enough sample, it's something that you can ultimately, solve. I do wish black people were getting a little bit, we could like leapfrog on that and just have a better sense of like, genetic science, because I think it is important. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's not,
Let
I
me
mean,
let me answer some of your questions. So,
okay.
the type of linguistics that you're referring to when you're dealing with the contemporaneous analysis of languages, that's actually that which is advocated by Greenberg. But what historical linguists are trying to do is they're using a scientific approach based upon the evidence to uncover, these sound correspondences through time. So it's actually a science where you can look at the evidence that you have in contemporaneous languages, apply the historical comparative method along with internal reconstruction. And then from those methodologies, you could be able to observe these changes through time. Now, orthography and writing is a little bit different than the languages that are spoken today, because the languages that are spoken today are evidence that we have of these changes. But if you were to look at, say, medieval Latin, or if you had an older script like Scythian or Greek, something that existed 2,000 years ago, you could observe the articulations within those languages at that time and then compare them with modern languages to be able to infer phonological and morphological changes. But I would not say that it's accurate that we don't have the ability to uncover previous sounds. That's actually the field of historical linguistics itself and history in general, because even historical reconstruction, there's the historical method that is used to be able to do a literature review, a survey of all the evidence to be able to affirm which evidence is accurate and which evidence is inaccurate, and then be able to build your inferences on the compendium of evidence that you have at your disposal. Historical archaeology is like that, historical cultural analysis is like that, and historical linguistics is as well. Now, with respect to genetics, the type of genetics using principal component analysis that is so prominent today in about 98% of the studies, that is flawed. And there's also something called geographic population structure that has been developed by a scholar by the name of Ilhan Elhaik. And he basically formulated that as a replacement of principal component analysis, right? Now, on the flip side, when you're dealing with the sampling bias and the classification bias, that is actually something that could be ameliorated if there were more Black people and more African people in the field, and if there was more support for African geneticists to get, an equal amount of samples from African populations, or to even reconfigure the different classificatory schemes that exist. But
Yes.
we can't necessarily leave it alone and act as if that's not a huge bias when it comes to the analysis of different genetic data.
I have one last question, Camji, verse, because you push it. What's African ancestry is nonsense. Dr. Kittle's research and information, I should really dismiss that offhand. That's he's not necessarily following the right method in terms of trying to establish whether the people who we professing to be of for one particular area or not of one particular area is just really based off of nonsense. He needs to follow the method of going through linguistics first, and then actually going straight down to before you even reach genealogy. So I should really just offhand just dismiss African and ancestry and all that nonsense. I should dismiss that.
I don't know. I don't know if I would dismiss it, because some of the STRs that he has are valid with respect to like what is used in conventional like federal agencies like the FBI, even international agencies like the UN. But you have to know how to contextualize his information, because what he's doing is that he's giving you a sex chromosome analysis on your paternal and maternal side, mother, 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 father, 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 father. So like that is less than, some people say, in between 1 and 2, others say less than 1% of the human genome, and it doesn't necessarily account for the autosomal data. And there's other tests that could give you a little bit more, like an S&P test on the autosomal level, or a full genome-wide STR test. But the thing about it is we have to recognize that genetics can only tell you a little bit. And, that's kind of why you see all these crazy sandboards talking about how the ancient Egyptians are Levantine. They're using specific samples from the intermediate period, or they're using a grave where they know that Eurasians dominated that population set. So they're
I
conveniently
see.
ignoring other sources of information for their own propaganda.
Spirited discussion there. For time's sake, though, I do want to move on to the next topic. I appreciate everyone. Appreciate Kamji for joining us.
Yeah.
Hopefully you'll stick around. We have a couple of more
Yeah.
topics.
I'm gonna hop onto my live that I have going on, then I'm gonna hop back once it's done.
Oh, your live is still going on? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Go
It's
ahead.
it's a premiere of a pre-record.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw you had a live coming up at 8 tonight, so I did see that. All right. So yeah, we'll be here till 11, just so you know.
Okay.
Shoot the breeze topic number 2 tonight. I see the ad thing is coming up again. I'll go in and take it off again before next week's show. I forgot.